Welcome to another edition of Living with Purpose. And I have a fabulous individual, Zach Kelling, who is, he describes himself as a engineer and cyberpunk with expertise across all the words that I don't understand, which is AI, blockchain, confidential computing, cybersecurity, fintech, robotics, but more importantly, he's actually a super nice person, led his life with purpose, has come through challenging situations, and has actually taken technology to the next level and has actually invested in it at very early levels, doing work most of us never did at that time. So please join me in welcoming Zach.
Hey, thank you for having me, Akbar.
So, Zach, talk about, let's start at the beginning. You grew up in Kansas. You had a challenging life. Talk a little bit about that and then what led you to technology and some of these early innovations that you did in that space.
Yeah, I was lucky as a child. I was given an Apple IIe. One of my aunts was a school teacher, and she gave me a little Apple IIe computer, I guess, somehow that they were getting rid of. And that was my first computer, and I was able to start programming in BASIC on it and kind of, just staring at this black terminal screen back then. And then I realized the public library, you could rent floppy disks with games on them. And then I immediately wanted to make games. As soon as that happened, I ended up going to DigiPen University in Seattle, actually, as like a teenager, and started learning 3D computer animation. I was lucky that in that era, I got put into, the gifted program in Kansas. So I have a very unorthodox origin story. I essentially never went to school, ever. I was put into gifted in second grade, and they let me create my curriculum then. So I actually left high school at 13, 14, and I went to pure science class. At the time, I was studying C++. They had a giant 800-page book they gave me in Borland, C++ compiler. But at the time, my family wasn't very well off, and I didn't own a computer. So beyond that, the old Apple IIe I had, which wasn't obviously, sufficient to the time I needed a modern Windows. So people were using. And so, after 6 months of trying to memorize that book and somehow intuit how programming works, I really gave up. I thought I was too stupid to do it. And I ended, and I was still a very young age. And also, I think, it was very awkward for me as a, 13, 14-year-old going to a college full of adults.
Right.
I was the only kid there. No one else was like me. And it just, it was very uncomfortable for me. And I the only place I could try to practice programming would be in the library, which is just full of other other adults, basically. I was like, it's very, very uncomfortable situation. And unfortunately, so I kind of matriculated a little too early. I dropped out and then gave up on everything and pursued a life of crime instead. Not knowing how to make money at that age and having, any, successful, any other examples, I guess, that people really look at. My dad was a doctor. Everyone else in my family is a doctor, but me. I had two brothers. They're both fabulous doctors. They're both married to doctors. My mom's a nurse. So outside of the health profession, I never really, and those people aren't, they're not really business people. My dad was never a business person. I had no idea how to make money. And, I had a older kid that was like a mentor to me, and he dragged me into, a bunch of stuff, ended up getting in trouble with the law, ended up getting convicted, going to prison even. And at 18, as an 18-year-old, I unfortunately got in trouble for stealing $300. At the time, my girlfriend was pregnant, and I was about to become a dad, and I was just trying to feed my family, honestly, and didn't know what to do. And I'd, basically, I had gotten to a weird point in life, and then I found myself, they gave me like 10 years to do at 18 years old. And so that was pretty shocking. I went straight into, the system and was eaten alive. And, I had incredible luck at getting in trouble with the guards. Like I had like dozens of disciplinary actions. They were always, just coming at me for some reason. And this is in 2001, right? This is very early, and it was a very bad time to go. And there's never a good time to be put into the system like that. But, I saw a lot of horrific stuff. I mean, people were getting in some cases murdered next to me. I saw people commit suicide. I saw a guy who was only 25 kill himself, hung himself right in front of me. And like 25, he had less time to do than I did. But then, being a bit of a hacker, I started going to the law library. I started teaching myself the law. And I realized the sort of treatment I was experiencing was against the law. Like I was being abused, in fact. And I was able to put together a lawsuit against the state of Kansas, basically. And I shared it with the warden. And I said, look, I don't even want to see you. I just want to go home. And so I managed to, she said, okay. And I was like, I want a guitar and a piano donated to the prison here. I'm a musician. I love playing music. And I was like, I think it's bullshit. No one, can play music. So they did that. They set up a music room and got me the heck out of there. And so I had pulled off my greatest escape ever. Saved myself, several years. Kansas doesn't have a good time. So they don't do good times. So if you're in, you're in. You're doing all I would have been stuck there for years to come if I hadn't been able to document things in a way that I could legally create a case to then prove they were using me at that time, So I was very, I guess, lucky that I was being abused and I could escape the situation. But I came out of prison completely fucked up, like I was agoraphobic, I couldn't go. I remember when I first got back, I would try to take my sisters out to eat, and just being in like a diner with people, I couldn't go back to it. I just was, someone's going to stab me or something. Like, I don't know, it's too much to concentrate on and focus and track everyone to make sure always always sitting with your back against the wall and like making sure there's no way someone can come at you from a weird angle. And I came out of that meat grinder pretty traumatized for many years. But 2006, 2005, it's funny, I was like one of the first Gmail users, and so I created a document, my career plan, and I wrote a list of over 100 companies, which I can show you. Kind of funny. I look at this document still, and I applied and tried to get jobs at every single one of them. And I started teaching myself. I doubled down on computer science because it was the only thing in my position I could think that I could do and teach myself. That I was really good with computers. I was programming already as a teenager. I would be writing kernel drivers for RAID cards that weren't supported by Linux and doing extremely low-level kernel programming stuff and developing high-performance web servers and SQL servers and all sorts of stuff like that. So I figured I could, my dad kind of, working with him, actually, he was a doctor, and my first commercial software product was a medical EMR billing platform. I actually built an entire, a medical billing platform from scratch because he was never getting paid, and I could never figure out how his other thing really worked, and it wasn't doing what we needed. So that was the very first thing I did, and I was able to teach myself, C# at the time, .NET. Microsoft was, really, that was what everyone who was trying to get a job in computer science in that era was learning. The Web 2.0 era had just started. Douglas Crockford's JavaScript, the good parts, had came out. I had just discovered Ajax, and I started building this sort of, so I saw that, even though I couldn't get a job, and in fact, no one would hire me either to be a programmer. I applied to try to get a job as a programmer. As a consultant, having my own company, as an entrepreneur, I founded Monoid LLC. Monoid is a joke from category theory, where a monoid is basically, a box that only has an identity function. So it's like a container with just me in it. So you're hiring Monoid, you're hiring me, and I would just do the work. I didn't have a team or anything. So that was my first company. And, I ended up building my first paying. My dad, I obviously didn't charge my father or anything. So I wasn't making money really doing that. But one of his patients came in, and I built a hunting reservation platform in Python at the time. This is in 2007. And I taught myself Python, and I never really liked programming until I found that language. Once I found Python, though, it was so well designed. And originally, the creator, Guido van Rossum, he's an educator. Originally, he developed ABC language, or predecessor of Python was ABC. And so it was always designed as really a a tool for education and to be as simple and elegant. And, as an artist musician, like programming in C++ and or PHP with all these weird, ugly brackets and shit everywhere. I didn't like what I was writing. I didn't like looking at it. It didn't feel like art to me. And then when I discovered Python, I was like, wow, this is like actually an art form. And, I really doubled down on that and, machine learning and AI in that era. We started doing, the earliest, actually Python's always been a huge part of the scientific community, and all the best AI machine learning stuff has almost always been in the Python domain.
Correct.
Yeah. So I got lucky to pick that and kind of switch into a role that finally I could make money with, despite not being able to get a job, essentially forced down the road of an entrepreneur. I was talking to my partner today, and I was saying, if I had a choice, I'd just get a jobs from someone else. Would I do it? Was this, because I was not really given the choice in my life to do anything else but this. But yeah, that's how I got my start. And, as a result of that, I focused on, AI, machine learning, which was really fascinating to me, and founded Hanzo AI, which is my Techstars funded AI company. And yeah, I've been very successful. Hanzo, we've used the Hanzo AI platform now to launch over 100 other companies, 100 different disruptive startups. I have an incredible track record, starting with the Scully, AR1 in 2014, which using our AI became the highest successfully funded product in the history of Indiegogo. And I was like, wow, we're really on something here. Yeah, we just, we kept doing that, and love to work with other entrepreneurs and kind of help them, bring their ideas to life.
So you're also an artist, or at least you paint and you indulge and you woodwork. Tell me how that brings back to what you're doing with technology and entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I think everything in life is an art form, really. If you want to get to that level with it, everyone's an artist, constantly creating art. And that's the unique function of humans as these, beautiful creators. We can continue to create, forever in every medium, and I had a design mentor who was my friend Megan Dean from LA. We worked with them, well, not working with them, but we shared an office with them for years. I remember Meg told me, Zach, if you can design, you can design anything. You can design a chair, you can design a table. You can design a table, you can probably design a computer. Design is design is design. It's simply, connecting to other humans, creating with empathy, hopefully trying to create something of value to society that will help others, and that's just a fun act that people just love to do. You can make art for a lot of reasons. I think for me, I make art a lot of the times for myself, just to kind of process things, and it's very relaxing. I find it, meditative to paint. I love music. Music's kind of my big passion. Both of my grandfathers were jazz musicians. So coming up in Kansas City, sort of jazz tradition and playing music and gigging as a teenager even, it's just always been such a huge part of my life. I love creativity in every form and aspect. And I love working and helping artists and musicians as well. It's unfortunate our society is so capitalistic, that the people that are the most valuable in many cases, just get overlooked for, the value they're bringing because it's not denominated in dollars. But, what would life be without art?
Yeah, no, as I mentioned to you, I constantly toggle between art and writing and teaching and doing other things. And it is really a way to, keep your mind and your brain functioning at different levels. What is it that is driving you today? Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I'm somehow still obsessed with AI. Now it's really trendy again, which is cool. One of the big problems I see in society today right now is we're obviously accelerating adoption of these AI systems that no one really understands. Researchers like, Yann LeCun have said, autoregressive LLMs are doomed. The core technology that backs, ChatGPT is the autoregressive transformer model, which was pioneered by Google in 2017. We have fundamentally not changed that architecture, for 8 years now. So it's never going to work the way people think it will work. they're doomed to hallucinate. It doesn't have system 2 level thinking. They have no true world model. It's truly a generative model, text generation. It's basically parrots. We have like really fancy parrots now. And, one of the really cool things about computers is a computer can do the same thing over and over again, predictably, reliably, 100% of the time. So, of course, you can train a computer to do whatever a human can do, and it will consistently do that better at that level forever. So, I think by shoving all of our human language and knowledge and the internet into these LLMs, we've created really, smart parrots that no one understands. They're also, so I think there's research and work that I'm really interested in doing. Like we're like at Hamza, we're developing diffusion models, and we're developing, different architectures from, moving past, sort of transformer model to other, like you're really like joint embedding, predictive model architectures, which can kind of have system 2 thinking. It can develop a world model. There's all this work, I think, on the technology side, but the thing that is most troubling to me is that these LLMs that we depend on, we don't know how they're trained, and we don't know what data they're trained on. Now, the Chinese are doing a great job releasing at breakneck speed, increasingly better LLMs every month. But they're not training them publicly. OpenAI doesn't reveal any of the training data. In fact, none of the LLMs, there's nothing, no frontier LLM that's ever been trained publicly where the public observe the data going into it. Now, the problem is you could maliciously train an LLM and it would be impossible for us to detect this, right? There could be, you could absolutely put, for instance, if you're Alibaba, the military says put in a kill switch in Quinn 4, the military adopts that, they can shut off our drones or do all sorts of crazy shit. There'd be no telling how they could attack, and there'd be no telling, it'd be very difficult to detect that because, they just shift the weights, and biases. You don't really know. You don't get to see the training data. You don't really know what's going to go in there. You don't know what's waiting for you. So I think, we really have to start developing these large language models publicly, openly, transparently. That's kind of been my current focus. And at Hanzo, that's one of the things we're working on. I've worked in the blockchain space for many years. And so kind of having fun marrying AI and blockchain to create an open public goods chain that could be used to train next generation LLMs, even larger than GPT-4, publicly and also more efficiently and cheaper. And then I think as well, that's, I think the inevitable conclusion, a centralized company, no matter how much money they can raise, cannot compete with the entire planet, right? It's one company. And so the decentralized model for AI, we're seeing a bunch of great projects pushing the envelope on this sort of stuff. The Intellect 2 model just got trained publicly. The Nous was training on, a Koch network. So, but, not in a way that's reproducible or easy to understand the data and the training data going in. At the same time, there's another problem, which is we don't have enough synthetic data. We don't have enough real data. And so we're already creating synthetic data, but creating enough synthetic data to then feed them to get to the high level of performance you want costs a lot of money too. So, these are the things that I'm like really obsessed with at the moment, hoping that we could, create AI in a way that's transparent, it's public, it's open, and it's fair and available for everyone to use. These frontier AI. So that's all day long. That's all I'm thinking about.
Let's turn to purpose.
Mm-hmm.
How are you living your life with purpose, and how did purpose help you, especially when you were in such difficult times?
Yeah. How, I think it's hard to understand anyone's purpose, right? I think everyone struggles with why am I here? What is this? For me, I had a mentor. He told me years ago when I first got out, and he was like, you can create money a lot of ways. You can take value from someone else. And you can only take what they already have. But if you create new value, you can create infinite value that can be far in excess of what anyone even today has, which is what we're seeing. The opportunity within an AI is to create more value than ever has been created before. These are such valuable things. And it made me realize, there's a lot of ways, to live your life. And I just have always, after my circumstances, I never wanted to find myself in a situation like that again, of course. But I like having enormously large challenges that I can work on every day. And I like, the intelligence I have. to hopefully benefit society. I'm an open source software contributor in my entire career. I've open sourced hundreds and hundreds of packages and libraries and so on and so forth, and not slowing down. And that has always been one of the most gratifying things. I love when I can build something and other people use it and it adds value to them and saves them a little bit of time, helps them avoid something. And like this drive to, increase our collective intelligence, working with everyone, I think is this natural human part of the condition. I think it's a beautiful thing. I think if you look at all the technological progress we've had in the last 40, 50 years, it's almost exclusively come from open source contributors working with people. And so for me, that's just, the purpose I've found is like, I've spent so many years staring at these, machines and algorithms that, I think I have a little bit of an insight into how to, certainly we've had a lot of success commercializing it. It's really, really fun to kind of build and imagine what the future could be like. And I think, we're always on a razor thin, there's this sort of a pendulum swinging back and forth constantly, of like, society will, invariably the things we're creating today will be abused by someone later,
Right.
And so, I think that is something I just don't want to see my family have to deal with. And I can really see how bad things could get. And I think the only way we can really, ensure that we maintain the current, and improve the state of, our current society is to work really hard at and make, doing the right thing the best thing, and aligning those incentives for everyone across, every layer of society to kind of work to collectively forward in a positive, productive way. I believe people would be happier doing that. But, in life, you find yourself doing stuff you don't want to do. You can't do, you shouldn't do, or whatever. Making those sort of mistakes is just, it's also part of living.
Yeah, and I love what you just said, right? That it is, purpose allows you to add value to anything that you do that goes beyond yourself, but to extend the community. Whether you do it through technology, whether you do it through art, whether you do it through science, whether you do it through being a doctor and an educator, if you move out of that extractive frame and really become a contributing frame, then I think you move into that space of purpose. So, Zach, share a little bit your one golden nugget, a piece of wisdom that you live by that you can share with our listeners.
Well, I love the one I just shared, which is, you can only take what someone's already got, but you can always create more, like this sort of reframing of things. Like I think when in businesses a lot, people are always trying to save money, cut corners, fire humans, replace them with AI. Invariably, this is not the right approach, right? You should instead be trying to think, how can we take what we have and somehow expand the value we're creating and giving to other people? That's been incredibly powerful for me throughout my entire career. I've always focused on that. But I would also say, being an entrepreneur in my situation, it was very, 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 very hard. And I think we talked about this a little bit, about the sort of hardship and how difficult a road and path it is to do something new. Many times we push the founders of these in these certain situations to kind of sacrifice everything. And kind of like, for instance, investors don't know that I've ever paid myself a salary in all the years I've done it correctly, right? I've subsisted on the least amount of what I've created. Even if you're in a position where you had some savings and you can live off your savings while you're building your business, don't do that. Take care of yourself. I was talking to another founder the other day and and he was asking me the most important advice I could give him. And I was like, the number one thing is like, you have to take care of yourself first. You're the CEO. And if stuff is not right with you, everything in the company will feel that. I didn't ever spend and think about myself enough and care for myself as well as I could. And so I think that's something I like to, really remind people, it's good to take time off. It's good to stop working, especially as an American, our society, workaholics, like no other. And we will work ourselves into the grave, literally, in the very literal dead sense. So, I think I think it's, you gotta really kind of figure yourself out. And that's why you have to love yourself. They always, people always say, can't love someone else until you love yourself. You just be cursing them with your existing problems. So I think that's really important. I mean, there's, I actually have written a lot of my principles. If you go to my webpage, you read the Zen of Hanzo, which is the philosophies and principles I apply to everything that I make. And it's really informed by Japanese. The I Ching, I really love. I think is a really powerful tool. I love working with from a principled position, it's like, if you don't have any principles, you don't know what you're doing yet. So I think it's really important to establish those principles that guide you, what's important to you. And those things change over time too. This is something I've had Hanzo for 12 years, and I've continually been adapting and changing our principles.
Right.
Starting out, as a software geek, one of the first principles I had was autonomy. I loved in the beginning this notion that everyone should be autonomous and work without any direction from me, which was easier for me, but it's bad for the company.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important, but if you don't take the time to write these things down and then analyze whether you're tracking to your own principles, you won't figure out where you're off, and so over the years I got rid of that one. That was like not a principle that's important to me now. I think what's more important is giving people the resources and support they need to be successful. And I love parallel organizations still, but there has to be leadership. You have to have at least one person that has a vision of some direction we're all agreeing to follow. And that guy better have principles around that, or you're going to get way off track. I like Charlie Munger. He shared his principles before he passed away. He had one of the very first principles he wrote down, I remember, was basically, it's like character matters, basically, of every person you're dealing with.
Good.
And that was something I really did not learn fast enough. I think maybe growing up on the streets and kind of being around people I was around, I had a high, and then of course going through this situation I was very comfortable in these more dangerous sort of environments and working with shadier people. And I had to let that go. I had to get rid of that. That was like something that in my position with my upbringing where I was at, I learned that one too slow. And, now one of the most important things to me is the character of people that I work with and do business with, and you never can compromise on that one.
I think that's such a fantastic way to end, like that character, principles, values, and working from your strengths, really what defines everyone. So Zach, thank you so very much for being on the podcast. It's been wonderful having you. And again, purpose is that renewable source of energy that continues to drive humanity forward. Find your purpose. It's not static. It continues to change. But follow a set of principles and values that define you and contribute. Thank you all very much for listening. Thank you, Zach, for being part of this process.
My pleasure.